My name is Kevin Van Lant. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor at Biola University. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about this notion of nurturing friendship and connection with your children, and also nurturing friendship and connection for your children with other children and with other folks as well. So let's spend a few minutes of just kind of talking about perhaps what at least what I've noticed in terms of the current kind of COVID-19 situation's effect upon children's ability to sort of experience friendships in the way that they experienced them prior to this outbreak happening. What I've noticed in my clinical practice, what I'm hearing from other parents and from my colleagues, is that children are experiencing something akin to what maybe some of you have felt over the past few months, and that is it's hard to stay connected in the way that you were connected prior to around March 15th. So your capacity to sort of spontaneously go and visit a friend or even to interact with people at church in the way that you used to in the past, these things have been significantly impaired, and we're having to find alternative methods to connect with people, and sometimes that's effective and sometimes that's not so effective. I'm noticing people talk a lot about just kind of feeling isolated, feeling a sense of kind of loss in the midst of that isolation, that they're lonely perhaps in that time. And maybe you can relate to this, or maybe you kind of see this in your children. Sometimes that disconnection sort of turns into other things that are a little bit more disruptive, like everything from sort of mild uncertainty to a movement towards a bit of disorientation and anxiety and stress, and that kind of goes down a different kind of pathway. But what I'm primarily noticing is sort of a need to really acknowledge the state that they're in right now. I've spoken with people who are loving this time. They're loving being at home. They're loving the slower pace. I have a friend who referred to this as the great pause. It's just this slowing down. I've been able to connect with friends in different ways because I have more opportunity, more time. And so I'm hearing a lot of different kind of range of experiences from I'm loving it to this is just making me kind of come unglued. So wherever you're at, wherever your kid's at, that's where we'll start. What I'd really like to do is talk for a few minutes about this idea of nurturing friendship with your children. This gets a little controversial because as soon as I say that, I have people who hear from me, well, that I'm not my child's friend, I'm their parent, or this is just going to turn into something that's much too permissive. And what I find is that there is middle ground in there that we need to kind of talk about, which is what does it look like to nurture connection, and maybe that's an easier way to think about it, to nurture connection that really looks like attunement to their need, which I would really say is a form of friendship. In fact, so much so that when we are ongoingly sort of misattuned to our child's needs, especially to younger children, the child doesn't blame you for not being attuned. They blame themselves for not being attuned. And that lack of attunement can turn into a shame that is really kind of lifelong. And so this need to be attuned in a friendship manner becomes really important. I think about Jesus in the Gospel of John, chapter 15, where he's talking about this idea that I no longer call you my servants, right? In some older translations, I no longer call you my slave, but I call you my friend because you are participating with me in the Father's work. And so this notion of friendship, Jesus can refer to us as friends, and we can kind of feel a sense of friendship with Jesus. And I'd encourage you to kind of think through what that might mean in terms of a friendship with your children. A couple of key things to this. One is this notion of eye contact. Eye contact is so fundamental to connection that sometimes I think we forget just how key it is. In fact, if you think about eye contact, the intensity level of eye contact really is arousing, right? It arouses our autonomic nervous system. It's a very right brain experience. Oftentimes it's very nonverbal. So this experience of connecting to an other is very meaningful and very significant in this development of this idea of connecting in a manner that is building of the child. For instance, I remember when one of my sons was really young, I was actually doing dishes and he was talking to me. He's probably 4, so he's over on the side and he's talking to me and he's talking and I'm kind of listening, but I'm kind of not listening. And And eventually he says, Dad, listen to me. And I said, oh, I'm listening to you. And he said, no, listen to me with your eyes, right? So eye contact is a form of communication that we really can't sort of reproduce in any other way, which is difficult right now with the COVID situation because it's hard to make eye contact. Even through digital media, I think that kind of eye contact in digital media is actually not as fulfilling as really natural eye contact. Physical touch becomes real key here because physical touch is both a left and a right brain experience, right? It's both, but physical touch is soothing. When a friend appropriately puts their hand on our shoulder or our arm and it feels just soothing, your children experience that same level of kind of soothing in the midst of this difficult time. So my encouragement to you would really be to think about deliberate physical touch. The other one is really this idea of focused attention, right? Making time for your children in a different kind of way than maybe you did before. I'm thinking about when the COVID situation first started and I had so much time on my hands, I thought this is gonna be great. Two of my college-age sons moved home and I was gonna have all this time with them. And I really found the time just got filled with other things. And unless I was really deliberate at spending time with them, it just sort of slipped by. And so one of the ideas around this is what do meaningful activities look like for you that kind of build friendship with your child? That might be as basic as having dinner together. That might look like going for a walk together. It might look like watching a movie together, something that really builds connection. So maybe what you can do is kind of pause this video for a minute, with yourself, just think about kind of the types of things that maybe would be deliberate kinds of experiences that you can use to build friendship with your children, or maybe speak with the rest of the folks in your group and talk about that as well. I forget, I'm losing track of time here, so. Okay. So a couple of last thoughts on this idea of building friendship with your children. One is this idea of appropriate and consistent limits and expectations. So sometimes when people hear friendship with their children, they'll feel like they'll hear permissiveness. That's not really what I'm talking about here. I'm really talking about kind of this notion of what does it look like to build the whole experience with your child, to attune to their whole brain structure, which is really what we're talking about with limits, and developing their kind of capacity to appropriately develop relationships with other people as well. You're really the model for that. You're the model for many of these things. In fact, the lifespan of your children, your developmental kind of experiences, their developmental experiences with your children are really the foundation to how your kids are going to develop connections with others in the future. So I'd really have you think about this notion of kind of boundaries, limits, structure, but also kind of freedom to connect, free-flowing kind of experiences of being a way to develop their capacity to develop relationships down the road. And then lastly, what does it look like to really listen empathically? Empathy is really the ability to kind of put yourself into the other person's experience. It's a very fundamental piece of what it looks like to develop relationships and friendships and to connect with others. In fact, so much so that we really like another brain that's actually kind of firing like ours. And that's a physiological experience of empathy. This other person's brain, this other person's experience is really looking a great deal like ours. And it's soothing. It's soothing to have somebody just listen, just kind of put themselves into our kind of situation or kind of wear our shoes for a few moments in time. And it allows them to really have this sense of connection. It allows us to have a deep sense of connection, which is fundamental to friendship. We'll probably wrap it up there, and then we'll talk about another type of friendship in the next video.